Welcome to The Moon-Touched Children, a Veilfall Saga's audiobook. Chapter 1. The silence wasn't natural. Neither was the chill. Sayamira Noctilum, Saya, paused, her breath misting faintly in the unseasonably cool air. A strange occurrence for the Solaris season, deep into the month of ethereal. Her gloved hand rested lightly on the smooth, cold bark of an ancient dreamwood, its massive trunk dappled by the weak, late-afternoon sun filtering through the dense canopy overhead. Beneath her tunic, the jade pendant she always wore felt strangely inert against her skin, unresponsive to the forest's unease. A few paces ahead, Noctera Lithosian, the senior ranger of their patrol, moved with the economical grace of long experience, her pale gray eyes scanning the tree line, missing nothing. Behind Saya, young Sylvaluna Astracalis walked with the careful steps of an initiate, her hand resting near the hilt of her knife, her violet eyes wide as she took in the ancient forest. Here, at the fringes of the vast Enuventis forest where it bled into the tamed lands of Minélara, the air should have been thick with the drowsy warmth of the season, buzzing with insects and filled with the rich scent of sun-baked earth and blooming flora. This forest, usually humming with the soft thrum of Lunar Amaya's grace, felt discordant, its natural magic stifled. Instead, a persistent coolness clung beneath the towering trees, carrying the damp, loamy smell of perpetual shade and something else, a faint, cloying sweetness like overripe fruit beginning to turn. Even the steady murmur of the nearby Inventari River, usually a constant, reassuring presence as it flowed towards its distant confluence with the Asventa, sounded oddly muted today, its voice hushed as if by the oppressive quiet. The usual thrum of life felt distant, muffled. The calls of forest birds sang hesitantly from the deeper woods, lacking their usual vigor, and the playful glow of the foxfire, usually glimpsed darting in the deeper shadows even this early, was entirely absent. The sigh of the wind high above felt thin and lonely, doing little to stir the heavy air that pressed in from all sides. Even the light seemed wrong. The golden shafts of the declining sun felt watery, lacking the vibrant intensity of Solaris, catching only dully on the high leaves of a distant glassleaf willow, instead of making them shimmer. Long, distorted shadows seemed too dark, too solid among the moss-laden roots and thick undergrowth. It was a quiet that felt less peaceful and more watchful, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Saya tilted her head, straining her ears. Her pointed elven heritage made her sensitive to the subtle dissonances. Noctera paused her own scan, glancing back with a questioning look, her expression unreadable. Sylvaluna shifted nervously, pulling her cloak tighter against the unexpected chill. "It feels strange today, doesn't it?" the younger elf murmured, her voice barely disturbing the quiet. Noctera merely grunted, her gaze sweeping the path ahead again. Standard patrol conditions. Keep alert. But Saya knew it wasn't standard. Not complete silence. There was the whisper of that thin breeze, the occasional creak of ancient branches settling under their own weight, the soft scuff of their leather boots on the packed earth path, and the subdued rush of the Inventari somewhere through the trees. But the vibrant cacophony, the layered chorus of a healthy forest ecosystem, was undeniably muted. It felt subdued, sickly. Even assigned to routine border patrols, Saya felt a deep sense of honor. To wear the Moon Ranger insignia, the silver crescent moon stitched proudly on her forest green tunic, and to walk these woods as a protector, was a privilege she never took lightly, especially given her mixed Savani heritage. She knew the Rangers valued diligence, patience, and observation. She focused on honing these skills with every step, pushing herself relentlessly, acutely aware of Noctera's assessing gaze and Sylvaluna's earnest diligence. Still, a quiet insecurity lingered, a constant companion whispering insidious doubts. It felt like she had to be twice as sharp, twice as dedicated, just to be considered half as good as her Orivani peers. It was likely how they viewed her father, too, after his fall from grace. The history of the Rangers was littered with tales, often told with pitying sighs or sharp critiques, of Savani who hadn't quite measured up, who hadn't met the impossibly high Auravani standards. Did Noctara see her dedication, or just another potential Savani disappointment? Did Silvaluna's quiet respect mask pity? The desire to prove herself worthy, to break that pattern, and to exceed expectations was a constant, quiet pressure. Maybe, a less charitable voice whispered, they just don't trust your judgment yet. She pushed the thought away, forcing her focus back to the unsettling environment. Observation. That was the key. She knelt, ignoring Noctara's slight frown at the break in pace. The cool dampness of the forest floor seeped slightly through the knee of her trousers. Pushing aside a clump of broad-leafed ferns near the base of the dreamwood, ferns whose fronds seemed a shade duller than they should be in Solaris, her gloved fingers probed the earth. The soil felt cold, clammy, clinging together unnaturally. She traced the intricate network of roots just below the surface. Here, the wrongness was clearer, more tangible. The fine root hairs, normally pale and vibrant with life, showed patches of a sickly grayish discoloration. Where several roots clustered together, a thin, almost invisible film of black slime coated them, cool and unnervingly slick to the touch. Even natural decay held a certain stark beauty, Saya thought, a place in the cycle. But this felt repellent, an ugly violation of life itself. Her pendant seemed to pulse with a faint, cold thrum against her skin, mirroring the wrongness she felt in the earth. Unnatural. Repulsive. Find something, Saya? Silvaluna asked softly, stepping closer, curiosity overcoming her nervousness. Saya quickly pulled her hand back, wiping the faint slime residue on the moss before drawing her notebook. Just checking the root system, she replied, keeping her voice neutral. She checked the ivy clinging tenaciously to a nearby rock face. Its lower leaves, closest to the ground, were tinged with the same unhealthy gray, their usual deep green muted, their veins barely visible. Drawing her small, leather-bound notebook and a charcoal stick from her pouch, Saya carefully sketched the discolored roots and the affected ivy leaves, noting the slimy texture and the unseasonal chill in the soil. She added the coordinates and the date, Veilfall 21, her handwriting neat and disciplined, despite the unease prickling her skin like ice shards, and the feeling of Noctara's impatient gaze on her back. It was subtle, easily missed, if one wasn't looking closely at the forest floor, at the foundations of life here. Was this significant? Or was she seeing threats where none existed, overly eager to find something noteworthy, something to prove her worth? The doubt was a constant companion, as cold and persistent as the unnatural chill in the air. Keep pace, Noctilum, Noctara called, her voice quiet but firm, cutting through Saya's thoughts. We have ground to cover before dusk. Saya nodded curtly, tucking her notebook away and rising smoothly. She fell back into formation behind the senior ranger, but her gaze remained fixed downwards, scanning the base of trees, the clusters of ferns, and the creeping ground cover along the edges of the winding path. Silvaluna, walking beside her now, mirrored Saya's downward focus, her initial nervousness replaced by a concerned curiosity. As they moved deeper along the patrol route, the subtle signs became more frequent, weaving a disturbing pattern. Saya pointed silently, Noctara acknowledging with the briefest of nods, Silvaluna leaning closer to see, at patches of moss near the riverbank that seemed less vibrant, almost grayish-brown instead of their usual emerald green. She noted how certain low-hanging branches bore leaves that were curling inwards at the edges, prematurely brittle despite the damp air. In damp hollows beneath fallen logs, the faint, slick residue she'd felt earlier clung to decaying leaves and exposed earth, catching the fading light with an oily sheen. Each observation was meticulously recorded in Saya's mind, ready to be transferred to her notebook later. It felt like the forest was being poisoned from the roots up, a slow, creeping sickness holding its breath, waiting. The wrongness wasn't loud or dramatic. It was insidious, a subtle undermining of life at its very foundations. It felt different even from the magical disturbances she'd occasionally sensed near moonstone deposits. This felt colder, more alien, almost reminding her of the hazy, half-forgotten feeling from the day she received her pendant from the ethereal luminarial named Minélara, a sense of power both beautiful and unnervingly potent. The sun dipped lower, its already weak light turning hazy orange as it slanted through the thick trunks. Shadows stretched, deepening from gray to pools of near blackness that seemed to swallow the light. The air grew colder still, the dampness intensifying, carrying the scent of decay more strongly now. The forest felt different, the earlier watchful silence transformed into something more intent, almost malevolent. Sylvaluna shivered again, this time not just from the cold, her gaze darting towards the deepest shadows between the trees. Even Noctara seemed subtly affected, her usual pragmatic scanning now tinged with a sharper vigilance, her hand resting almost constantly on the grip of her bow. "Turning back," Noctara announced abruptly, her voice low. "Light's failing." Saya felt a strange mix of relief and reluctance. Relief to be leaving this increasingly oppressive atmosphere, reluctance because she felt she hadn't fully grasped the extent of the anomaly. As they retraced their steps towards the ranger outpost nestled near the village of Hannah Blossom, the forest seemed to close in behind them. Noctara set a brisk pace, clearly eager to be clear of the woods, while Sylvaluna kept close to Saya. Trying to break the heavy silence that had fallen again, Saya glanced at the younger elf walking beside her. "You seem well suited to the patrols, Sylvaluna. Was joining the rangers always your path?" Sylvaluna looked slightly surprised by the question, her violet eyes meeting Saya's for a moment, before returning to the path ahead. "It was," she confirmed, her voice soft but clear. "My family has a history of service. My father and older brother are sun rangers. It felt expected, right?" She hesitated for a moment. "Though I confess, the path felt clearer after witnessing the silent conjunction from the peaks near our enclave as a child. The stars, they spoke differently that night. It solidified my desire to understand and protect the celestial balance." "The stars spoke?" Saya murmured, intrigued despite herself. Her own connection felt more intuitive, less defined than the formal traditions Sylvaluna seemed rooted in. "In a manner of speaking," Sylvaluna clarified, a faint blush touching her cheeks. "A feeling. A sense of immense history and forces at play. The rangers felt like the best way to serve that." She glanced sideways at Saya, her expression open and curious now. "And you, Saya? Your path seems less straightforward, perhaps? What drew you to the rangers, here on the border?" Saya felt a familiar flicker of defensiveness at the implied difference, but Sylvaluna's genuine curiosity softened the edge. She offered a small, wry smile. "My path wasn't paved with celestial signs or family expectations," she admitted, keeping her voice low as Noctara strode ahead. "More like carved out of the whispering peaks themselves. This forest, these groves, they were my sanctuary long before they were my duty. Protecting them felt less like a choice and more like breathing." She shrugged lightly. "The insignia just made it official." Sylvaluna nodded slowly, considering this. "Protecting what feels like home," she murmured, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Perhaps our paths aren't so different after all, just the starting points." Saya offered a genuine smile this time, a brief moment of connection before the looming outpost and the weight of her uncertain report pulled her thoughts back to the present. Different paths, different reasons, all leading them here, into this strange, chilled twilight. She carried the weight of her observations with her, a collection of subtle dissonances that painted a picture she didn't fully understand, but felt deeply in her bones. A wrongness that resonated faintly with the pendant resting against her heart. Would the senior rangers, would Commander Serenitatis see the pattern in these subtle signs? Or would her report be dismissed as the overactive imagination of a junior ranger, a half-elf girl burdened by the legacy of her bloodline, still learning the deep language of the woods? The uncertainty settled in her stomach, a cold knot tightening as she quickened her pace alongside her companions, eager for the familiar lights of the outpost, ready for her debriefing, and steeling herself for whatever assignment and judgment would come next.